Andrew Simpson, welcome. Bleh. Start that one again. Andrew Simpson, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. It's been good to catch up before we get started here and everything. I'm so intrigued. Your players' fitness and performance business is so cool because it's not like most gyms where like we'll get you fast, we'll get you strong. It's got that, but then it's like, but we're also going to work on the leadership piece and we're going to work on the mindset piece. We're going to work on the whole person and not just the muscles, if you will. So tell our listeners a little bit about that and what you do.
Yeah, well, it didn't start out that way, right? I mean, we got into the gym business thinking that we were going to be the bigger, faster, stronger gym and help athletes become elite. But I think any great coach or business owner finds what the problems are that their clientele or that their audience is facing, and then adapts the business to meet more of those needs. And so for us, the first thing we recognized when a parent called me up one day, frantic about her daughter, just who was so skilled and so talented, but always unraveled during games and mentally she couldn't keep it together. And so the parent was like, can you help her with this? And to me, I was like, I thought we did help her with this, right? We're helping them get to the next level. And we just weren't. So we had to figure out how do we incorporate some mindset and mental game training into, the session. So that's where we established, 52, I'm not going to get into the details, but basically every week we've got a different message for the athletes: mindset, mental game, leadership, character, life, anything that makes them better outside of just their sport. And we incorporated that into the first 5 to 7 minutes of every session. So we prioritize it. That always comes first. And then the rest of it, as far as developing the whole person for us, it's more about the coaches that we select and how we train them up to make an impact in the lives of the athletes. Anyone who's more obsessed with the human body and anatomy than they are about transforming young athletes' lives, they're not going to be a good fit for us. And so I think it really comes down to the coaches that we pick and that we hire on our team.
Yeah, I mean, how many do you have to weed through? And I only ask this question because, go back 10, 15 years with yourself, you might not have got hired by you.
Right. Yeah. So how many do we have to weed
Well,
through? I
well,
mean,
well, I mean, or do you explain the philosophy and then they're like, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way.
yeah, sure. I mean, our hiring process is definitely pretty extensive, but I would say, one of our unwritten core values that we talk about all the time is we are mentor leaders. And then the tagline is be the coach that you always wish you had.
Mm.
And so the right coach latches onto that and they learn more about that value. And they're like, yeah, that's me. Like growing up, I either had that coach that changed my life, that went way above and beyond the call of duty, that cared about me more as a person, or I didn't have it and it was a void and I really wanted it. And now I want to be that for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we attract, one of those two types of people in those situations, and they just fit really well into the culture.
Yeah. Did you have that coach growing up?
I did not. And you know what? I say that, but I always, whenever I say that and I'm asked that question, I think back, I'm like, maybe I just didn't receive it, right? Like maybe I did
Yeah.
have that coach, but I wasn't in a place where I really cared about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have that coach until I was about 19 years old. I had a great mentor coach come into my life who did what I wish a coach would have done for me at age 12 or 13, because it would have probably saved me 6 years of bad decisions and, going down a rough path. And so, yeah, that's why we exist now as a company.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I like your point there of like maybe I did and I just didn't know because, but I mean, not every coach is everything for everyone, right? Like,
Right.
you might have had teammates who think about the coach and go, that guy changed my life. Just like any student, right? Like last night, my daughter's a senior in high school and there was this pageant and she got asked this question, who is your most influential teacher, right? Now, it doesn't mean the other teachers are bad or whatever, but why did this guy stick out? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, why have hundreds of kids taken his class and wouldn't answer it that way? Right.
Right.
So
Right.
when the student's ready, the teacher will appear, right?
So true. So
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Cool. And so when you think about the coach that you always had, what are some of the qualities that you think about? And maybe these align with the values of your organization, but like what are things that you look for that you think all athletes are looking for?
Yeah, when I talk with athletes, and I talk with a lot of them, whether it's on Zoom or in person, um, almost consistently, what they're looking for most is a coach that's going to care more about them as a person than just as an athlete. Although they definitely want the coach that's going to challenge them and push them to be their best, right? So it's like for me, it's just that balance of those two things. The coach that I always wish I had is a coach that pushed me and challenged me in the way that I needed to be pushed and challenged, but also asked me equally as many questions, if not more questions, about life and success and relationships and health and those types of things, because I think the questions that we ask reveal our values. And so I always want coaches that are going to ask questions that reflect right what we value most.
Yeah. Do you teach like your staff coaches different techniques and tools of getting that connection apart, right? Because this doesn't mean, oh, I need a half-hour meeting with everyone each week. Like that's impossible, right? But just like what are some of the techniques and tools that you give your staff to say, this is how a kid's going to know that you care about them?
Yeah, yeah. So we've coined this term in our gym called magic moments,
Mm.
and it's when you look over on the gym training floor and a coach is just kneeling down next to an athlete having a conversation in the middle of the session. And from the outside looking in, it looks unproductive. It looks like the athlete's slacking off, but we know in our culture like something special is happening right there. And so that's one of the things, right, that we love to see happening. And then honestly, for us, man, and I don't know if you realize this or not, like having my staff hear from people like you, your TED talk, your books. I've got some other friends in the industry that are just these love powered coaches who really are great at developing the whole person. That's what I try to put in front of our coaches, because every once in a while, right, or if it's too often where I'm the one telling our coaches, right, what to do or how to act, it kind of it gets stale. But yeah, man, like that's one of the best things we can do for our coaches is bring in other coaches who are great at what they do.
They say it's hard to be a prophet in your own land, right?
Very true. Very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And first of all, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. And as Jerry and I always say, we try to be the flute, right? We learn from all these smart people and we take it all in and then we try to make it sound pretty coming out. But all we're doing is learning from other people on this podcast, meeting people like you, running, our conference, things like that. So, it
Mhm.
sets it's so true. And I love this idea of these magic moments and what are these magic moments and looking at it, someone getting down on a knee eye to eye with an athlete, like it's so critical. And it's just these short little moments and people say, well, we don't have time for that. Like you don't have time not to do that because that athlete who's not in the right mindset, who doesn't think the coach cares, they'll never perform their best, will they? And I mean, I'm sure you can see it on any given day when some kid comes to the gym and the physical part, they go to, max out on a lift or time a 40 and they do worse than last time. And the answer is usually, sometimes it's, oh, I'm kind of sick or I didn't sleep, but sometimes it's like, oh man, I'm just stressed. Like,
Mhm.
midterms, finals, papers, whatever it is, right?
That's 100% right. And I think that as a coach, we've got to redefine what being productive actually means, right?
Yeah.
Because being productive, it isn't always that you maxed out on bench press today and got stronger. Being productive might be in the first 5 minutes of that session, you looked into that kid's eyes and you could tell something was off. And in the first 5 minutes, they unloaded something on you that helped them feel better. And then they had a 50-minute productive session, right? Like then they were able to train hard. So for us, productivity as a coach could come in many different forms.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And just, them understanding deep down that my value as a human being isn't dependent on this, right? On
Mm-hmm.
this moment. And I think again, so many people like that it's not a type of coaching that they get. And again, like I think you're unique in that you teach coaches this, right? Most soccer organizations, most lacrosse organizations, most insert sport don't teach their coaches this. That's about creating these moments. That's about creating connection. And of course, all your coaches need to know anatomy and physiology and kinesiology. You know what I mean? Like they need to understand that, but they also need to understand who's in front of me and what do they need today.
Yeah, spot on. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. So you've also written a couple books here. What made you write a couple books? I think you've done three now, correct?
The third one's coming out here
Okay.
soon. Probably by the time this podcast airs, it'll be
Nice.
out. The Unstoppable Athlete is the third one. But the first book, I'll tell you what. Again, your TED Talk really spurred me on to write that first one. It was part of the catalyst because when I heard your TED Talk, I was like, man, I've got this message too. Mine is a little bit different. I feel like I've got some different things to say, but like I definitely feel like I share your same passion for developing the whole person, and so that was part of it. But then the big turning point for me writing the first book, I never planned to write a book. I really didn't ever plan to read a book. But then uh, for me, it was 2018, November of 2018. My father had just passed away from a really bad, tough battle with lung cancer. And 2 days after that, I was reading a book called Chase the Lion by
Mm,
Mark Batterson.
yeah.
And in that book, Mark Batterson shares why he writes books. And he says because they're like time capsules. He writes
Hmm.
them because he wants his children's children to know what their great great grandfather stood for. And he believed that everybody has a unique message. And if you don't share that message, then that message will get lost eventually.
Hmm.
And so that hit me hard because, again, I really believed that I had this message on my heart to share with the youth sports community, all the challenges that were happening, right? Parents fist fighting at sports games, coaches or, athletes I write about in my book that, had cut marks on their wrists, but coaches didn't even notice it because they were looking at the performance, but not the person. And,
Hmm.
the list goes on and on of the challenges in youth sports, right? Injuries at an all-time high and climbing. Um, and I was like, man, I got to write this book. So that's what spurred me on to write that first book. And I thought that was going to be it, one
And
and done, right?
that's the youth truth.
The youth truth. Yep,
Yep.
coaching and parenting in today's crazy youth sports world.
Hmm.
And and so in that book, I definitely I wanted to talk a lot about mindset too, right? Because that's a big piece of what we do. So I wanted to teach coaches and parents how to train the mind of their players. And then about a year and a half, 2 years went by. COVID happened. The suicides at the college level. I don't know if you remember, it was 2022 that year. It seems like they multiplied. You were
Hmm.
hearing about it every time you turned around, the headlines about college athletes taking their own life. And I really felt convicted that I needed to write a book to give these athletes control back of their mind and their experience.
Hmm.
Because what if society doesn't change and keeps putting pressure on our athletes and putting them on a pedestal? What if your coaches don't change and you come across those really, really tough coaches? What if your parents don't change and they keep putting pressure on you? Like, what if none of that changes? Then what? Right? Because I felt like I just kept seeing that as a society, we were pointing the finger and blaming people instead of equipping and empowering these very capable teen and college athletes to understand how their psychology works, understand why they think the way they think and why they do what they do, and then give them the second book is literally called Athlete. I'm talking to you, and it's the 7 mindset hacks to dominate in sports and life. And
Hmm.
so I wrote that book to really give them tools so that they weren't they had control more or less
Hmm.
of what happened between the years.
And then we'll talk about the unstoppable athlete as well, but I want to talk about the youth truth a little bit because, as we've sort of said on this podcast a little bit, Jerry and I have been working on a new book, and this is a book for parents and helping them understand um, the sports world, right, that they live in, right? They're
Mhm.
funding it, but they can't drive the bus, right? You can pay for the gas, but you can't drive the bus, right?
Right.
And so, how do you like what do you see? Do you see kids coming into your gym and then realize from what they're saying and doing that they've lost ownership of this experience and it's their parents running it? And how do you rescue them from that moment?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with helping them to recognize that the two people in their life that they want to make proud the most are their parents,
Hmm.
right? Like that's a fact. And for almost every person, it's usually one more than the other, right? You either
Hmm.
want to really please your dad more, or you want to really please your mother more, and there's reasons for that. And so it's first working on that with the athlete, but then it's well, okay. Let's talk with the parent, right? Let's connect with them. So in our gym, actually, we've got a little questionnaire that the athletes fill out when they start. and they just self-identify with these different statements. One of the statements is, my parents put a lot of pressure on me to play well. And
Hmm.
then another statement is, I fear disappointing my parents. And any athlete that highlights both of those on their questionnaire, 30 minutes later, when we're sitting down with the parent talking with them, is when we have an opportunity to ask more questions and to point that out. This is the reality of what's going on in your kid's mind. So for any athlete that is highlighting that, yeah, they've definitely lost control of their experience because they're operating out of fear or people pleasing rather than their own desire to be successful.
And that's super interesting. And I want to make sure people understand that point that when you, as part of your intake process with
Mm-hmm.
athletes, you're talking to the parents as well, making sure they're here for the right reasons and understand what's happening here and can best support their child in this process. And what a powerful thing to potentially be hit over the head with is this is what your
Yeah.
kid put on their intake form, right? When you tell that to people, what's their usual reaction? Like, is it surprise? Is it defensive? Is it all of the above?
Surprisingly, and this should be encouraging for any coach that maybe fears, the parents and doesn't want to ruffle feathers with the parents. Surprisingly, 1 out of every 10 get defensive.
Hmm.
The other 9 out of 10 are like, thank you so much. I didn't realize I was doing this. And
Yeah.
it opens up a doorway for communication between them and their young athlete.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I would agree with you. My own unscientific experiment would be the same thing. Most people have no idea, right? But I
Right.
only have the best intention in mind for my kid. I only love them. I just want them to have opportunities I didn't have. These are all coming from a very, very good place,
That's right.
right? And all of us, no matter what, we screw up once in a while, we mess it up. It's not like we don't do that. So but I think that's really important. And I think a lot of coaches, regardless of sport, don't engage because of the 10%, or it's maybe even smaller than that, right? Because
Right.
of the one out
Right.
of 10 who's like, who are you to tell me this? Or, well, if you knew my kid or whatever, right? They're super like, let's just not engage. Let's not even ask the question. But
Yeah.
man, most parents have no idea what they're doing to their child.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a coach actually when we were training a new coach on how to do this with the parent. They said, yeah, but I don't really need to, like, if they highlight that, I don't need to point that out to the parent, right? And I said, that's your job.
Yeah.
That's our job, because that could do more for that young athlete than 12 weeks, 24 weeks of training in our gym.
100%, man. I'm so glad you said that because I agree that freedom from disappointing mom and dad, realizing they love
Mm-hmm.
you no matter what, gaining ownership of this experience, especially in these sort of transitional years when you don't really have ownership when you're 7, right?
Right.
But when you're 12, 13, 14 and kids start pushing back, right? They start pushing back against mom and dad. That's when it's really, really like, yeah, that's when it's so important that parents have this awareness. Now you got to let go. Now you just got
Yep.
to let them play. Now you let them drive the bus and you ask, how can I support you in this? Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a question for you, actually. I'm going to
Yeah.
flip the script. I'm curious your thoughts on this because I'm a young parent of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I haven't really got into the realm of, athletes and sports. But I'm always curious, the parents that are putting that pressure on their kids to play well or overly involved, do you find that it comes from maybe a place of fear that the parent doesn't want to look bad, doesn't want to look like the parent who their kid's not successful or their kid isn't disciplined enough? Does it come back ultimately to the parent?
I mean, I think there is, and so we could say there's some ego in it, 100%. I
Sure.
mean, and as you've already learned as a young parent, right, or with young kids, when your kids do something awesome, it swells you with pride that really nothing else does anymore because they're the center
Sure.
of your universe, right? And so if you fast forward that into sports and you see your DNA on display and it's dominating the other DNA, you can't help but feel good,
That's
right?
right.
But that's when you need to take a deep breath and just um go, whew, okay, well, what size pond are we swimming in here? And what age is my
Mm-hmm.
kid? And the fact of, all they care about after the game is the snack. So who cares how many goals they scored, right? And so I think this is really important. And there's this massive fear of missing out, right?
Yeah,
There's a woman, Jennifer Wallace, who we're about to have on the podcast, just wrote a book this year called Never Enough. And it's not just sports, right? It's school, it's activities, it's work. Like it's never enough what today's kid does, right? To
right.
keep up with the Joneses. It's always can find one kid who has one more volunteer hour or one more award or one grade point higher, you know. And
Yep.
so kids feel all this pressure that no matter what I do, it's never enough, right? And I've just had a daughter go through the college application process, and it's amazing, right? To just they feel the pressure of, oh, so and so got in here or so and so got in there, and they feel so much pressure as well. So I think sometimes as a parent, it's just clearing that interference away and letting them know, you are enough.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah. Um, so how what are some of the things that you advise parents in terms of being supportive of their kids? Like what are some of the tools you give them, or what are some of the things, because I imagine it's not just how you can support them come to the gym, it's how you can support them in everything they do.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the questions that we were asked one time by a parent is, how can I be maximally supportive without interfering? And I love that
Super
question.
question.
Um, here's something fun for parents. I don't know how fun they'll think it is, but it's a challenge, and I put it in the Youth Truth book. It's not specific. It's not exactly what you're mentioning, but it does tie in because we did in 2018 or 2019, we did something called the Say Nothing Challenge, and it actually got some good traction. We had close to 1,000 parents pledged to say nothing. And what it was five things. It was number one, no pregame reminders.
Hmm.
So don't give your kid any pregame reminders about, hey, make sure you drive to the paint, or make sure you pull up for three, or make sure you swing it strikes. Like no pregame reminders. The second one was no bribes. So
No
no,
bribes, yeah.
I'll give you $1, or I'll give you, McDonald's if you score a goal.
Or
So no
money. I
bribes.
mean, forget McDonald's, like money's the worst.
That's right. Money is the worst because then it's never enough, right? Next time you better be giving me 20.
Yeah.
No pregame reminders, no bribes, no pregame motivational pump up text messages or sending them, quotes or, anything that just creates this unneeded pressure for them to perform. No yelling during the game. That was the hardest one for
Yeah.
parents to abide by. No yelling at the refs, no yelling at your kids, no yelling at the coaches, only cheering. Um, and so that was hard for parents to do. And then the last one was no post game talk on the car ride home.
Hmm.
The 15-minute rule, if you will. No post game talk, no talk at the dinner table. So it was those five things.
I don't know where you live, but my car ride's a lot longer than 15 minutes.
There you go. So it's got to be the 30-minute post
Uh-huh.
game. But basically, what happened was and actually something funny happened because I walked into a sports game, local sports game during this challenge, and apparently like some parents in our area had like found out about this and seen the video that we did, and you could just tell they were like scowling at me as I was walking into the game. And it was a nice game though, because there was no parents yelling, there was no it was just an enjoyable game to be a part of. And
Yeah.
so I think the concept of the Say Nothing Challenge, it's a little extreme. And all five of those things, if a parent is listening, I don't think they're all inherently bad, right? To send your kid a pregame text message of encouragement, I wouldn't say it's bad, but do you have the discipline, and can you pull yourself out of it for long enough to even do those five things? And the extent to which it creates some tension in the parent, I would say, is the extent that they're too overly involved and they're interfering at that point. If it's like really hard for you to do those five things. And so that's a really good barometer for a lot of parents, is to do something like that and to see how it affects them. But the other way I think that parents can be most supportive of their young athletes is to have their own goals.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is I was interviewing a mom who is just a rock star mom with two really high level athletes. And it didn't seem to matter whether her kids were like at the top of their game getting scholarships or struggling big time. This mom always stayed very steady and level. And it was never like this roller coaster of emotions for her. And I asked her, like, how do you do it? Like, how do you like have that balance? And she said, Andrew, it's simple. I've got my own goals in my own life.
Mm,
Like my kid's life is not my life. Like I'm pursuing things. She said, and it's amazing because just by me setting goals, I never have to tell my kids to set goals. Like
hmm.
I set goals in my own life, and my kids just seem to take suit, right? Because our kids watch what we do, not they don't listen to what we say as much. And so I just thought that was a great tip on how you can support your kids is by being the example every day.
Yeah, I mean, you can't live vicariously through them, right? You can't set aside everything in your life in pursuit of what you think they should be pursuing. That's when it starts to fall apart, right? When you start to
Yeah.
use we struck out 10 batters and not, Andrew struck out 10 batters, that's when we get in trouble. Right? That's when we get stuck. When our identities become intermingled. And what that mom does is she keeps a separate identity, an
Mm-hmm.
identity of her own adult womanhood, separate from how her kids play in sports, separate, I'm sure, as well from how they do in school, right? That this is not if they don't score 20 points, say it's not a bad reflection of my parenting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
would say, and I write about this in my new book, The Unstoppable Athlete, where we can't just stop at what we don't want, right? Like, I don't want to live vicariously through my kids. I'm not going to live vicariously through my kids. Like, human beings are not wired to just focus on the don't. We have to replace it with something positive, right? So
Hmm.
I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to live vicariously through my kids. Therefore, I am going to blank, right? Set
Hmm.
goals for myself,
Hmm.
pursue my dreams, find what I'm passionate about, right? Like, so what's the thing you're going to replace it with? I think is a really important next step.
Yeah. And so instead of, right, we have the five no's. What are the two or three yeses? What can a parent do? Because people always ask me this, well, then what am I supposed to do on the sideline? Right?
Yeah.
Things like that. I just have to not say anything. It's supposed to be silent. And it was funny. I walked my son decided to play high school golf this year, and I walked just the other day with him a couple holes, and it's so eerily quiet because the kids don't really know each other, right?
Right.
And they're playing against each other, and versus going to a soccer game or you know or a ski competition or something. I'm like, man, it's really quiet out here.
Yeah. I would say that it's actually, it should be encouraging for parents. The bar is really low and it doesn't take much to give your kids what they want from you in sports.
Yeah,
Number one, it's showing up.
yeah.
Number two, it's cheering and encouraging.
Hmm.
And then number three, it's asking questions and being curious and giving them, putting them in the driver's seat of their experience by asking them
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
I
And I
can't tell you, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I can't tell you how many athletes I talk with, and it comes out over and over again. Like they either really value that their parents show up and that they're at their games, like that they talk about that, but then they definitely mention if their parents don't come to their games because they're too busy or they've got work stuff going on. And like they talk about that more than anything. So I take that as a clue. Kids just really want you to be there, and that's pretty much it.
Hmm. And I like the third thing there, the ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's an absolutely critical part of it. Ask your son or daughter what they want you to do on the sideline.
Yeah,
Ask them, right? Especially, if you know a lot about their sport and you're capable of giving some constructive feedback, ask them when's a good time to have a conversation, right?
that's good.
So like getting, asking and listening as a parent is huge as well, and then honoring what your child asks for. Just, you know what? Just leave me alone before the games. That's super
Mm-hmm.
helpful, right? But
Yeah.
parents can have some roles, right? Like we know that, if you're staring at your screen right up until your warm up, your peripheral vision struggles. So get them off their screens. That's your role. Make sure they
That's
get good nutrition. Make sure they go to bed the night before with no devices before bed. Like these are things that you can do that are
mm-hmm.
super helpful for your kid, right? Instead of worrying about giving the pre-game motivational speech 2 hours before the game, where even if it was really good, it's already worn off anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love the idea of asking the right questions. We're learning a lot with our 5-year-old son right now, who has a lot of his own challenges, and something
Well,
that
he
we're
always
learning
constantly
is
asks you why, why, why.
he does ask why, right? He asks that question all the time. But no, we're learning the power of asking a question that a kid can easily say yes to.
Mm,
So a parent going to their kid and saying, "Hey, I'm assuming that it makes you feel a little bit stressed out when I'm yelling at in games. Is that true?"
mm-hmm.
Versus what a parent who maybe is in a little bit of denial would say would be, "I don't stress you out when I yell in games, do I?" And
Mm,
then of course the kid's going to say, "No, no, no," because they're thinking in their minds, this is what mom or dad wants to hear, right? This is what's going to kind of keep the conversation at bay. But asking those questions that kids can easily answer yes to is a great way to, number one, help them to be honest, but then also to help them to release their stress and perform better ultimately.
hmm. Yeah. Oh, I mean, this is such good stuff and such important stuff. Um, So with the athletes, like I think it's also important for parents to understand what does good look like, right? And because a lot of people, oh, my kid is, the word I hate most is elite, right? Like, no, there's
Mm-hmm.
no elite 12-year-old except maybe in gymnastics or figure skating. That's it. There's female gymnastics as well, right? There is no such thing as elite 12-year-old football player or soccer player or a lacrosse player. It doesn't happen, right? So what are some of the things that you can point to parents and say, like, you know what? Like, here's the behaviors that your kid needs to get right. Focus on those things because this is what the best of the best do.
Yeah, that's man, we could have a whole list of those types of things. The first thing that honestly came to my mind is when an athlete steps into their strengths and when they're operating in their strength zone versus their weaknesses or what they're not good at. The behaviors of reflecting on their progress and what they've done well versus just how far they fall short and how far they still need to go. I think that's a really important thing that parents can have an influence on is by not just pointing out where your kid is falling short, which ultimately causes them to think about the negative aspects of their game. And when we think about the negative aspects, I've seen it time and time again, we perform worse, right? We just don't play well. Versus asking them, "Hey, where do you feel like you've made progress over the last 3 months? How have you grown as an athlete over the last year?" This was like for me in my personal life, like I had to really work on this because the perfectionism would always get the best of me, right? I never took time to celebrate my victories or my progress. It was always on to the next thing and on to the next thing. And I came to a point where I realized like I was never satisfied, right? I believed the lie that society tells you, which is to never be satisfied as an athlete, never be satisfied with where you're at, always keep going. I believed that. And then I realized if I get to the end of my career and if an athlete gets to the end of their sports career, and they're never satisfied, that sounds like a miserable sports career.
Yeah.
And so when we as parents or coaches are only ever talking about what's next, how do you get better? How do you get to the next level? Let's work on this mistake. Let's work on this weakness. If that's all you focus on, I'm telling you, your joy is going to go down the drain. Your passion is going to go down the drain. And what follows is your performance ultimately goes down the drain. So that would be a thing that I would say parents can help shift the behaviors to focus more on progress versus just the bigger and better future that you're after.
There was a great quote recently from Caitlin Clark, and it was an article, a Sports Illustrated article by Wright Thompson, sort of about Iowa basketball and her and how she was so angry at her teammates, and so when she chased records and points and this and that, and then sort of her sort of aha moment was be at peace with the journey, or be at peace on the journey, because it's really the journey that comes, right? And the difference is, society tells us win championships, awards, accolades, social media followers, and fulfillment tells us family, friends, loved ones, spirituality, whatever. And those two things don't really align very well. And so I think it's so critical that what you're talking about is that this satisfaction, that's almost a not being satisfied with how society judges us
That's a good point. Yep.
instead of how we judge our own fulfillment.
Yep, that's really great. And the thing on Caitlin Clark is really helpful. And I think that over the years, like I'm working with so many athletes, I've always tried to figure out like what is like the one thing that every athlete needs to hear to make sure they succeed at a really high level and stay healthy, happy, and positive relationships along the way. Like, what's the
Mhm.
one thing? And I've come to the conclusion it's not one thing. For me, like, I think it's really three things. I think one, it starts with the foundation of what is your definition of success and failure, right?
Mhm.
Like, big picture, like, what does winning really mean to you? What does success really mean to you? Number two, I believe you have to establish habits of what I just mentioned, which is reflection on the past and reflecting on your victories and reflecting on your progress. And that's really important because it keeps you from the anxiety and the stress and the fear of never being enough. Um, and then ultimately, the third one is you have to have continual setting of goals, but we break goals down into three types of goals. Survive goals. What's the base goal that I need to make in order to just feel like I survived this season or this year? What are my succeed goals? That's the second level. These are the things that I must accomplish to really feel successful. And then I'm going to set some big dream transform goals, right? If all the stars aligned, I'm going to write them on paper, get on Sports Center top 10 plays, get the D1 scholarship. Like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to put it on paper. So I just believe it comes down to those three things. And if an athlete can do those three things consistently, which is not easy, then they can have both. They can have their cake and eat it too, right?
Mhm.
Success and health and happiness along the way.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the other parts on health, and I want you to speak to this as a gym owner. Um,
Yeah.
Before, and then I want to get into the Unstoppable Athlete book because I think that's probably what you're talking about a lot in that book is this idea of the grind. You got to grind every day. You got to be out there every day, right? This myth that, the best never sleep and never rest. And actually in sport, that's one of the worst things you can do. Like, because you're never recovered enough. If you never recover, right, you can't ever go 100%. And a
Mm-hmm.
100% at maximum, whatever, that's when you really have the big gains, and then you recover, and then you go 100. And there's, the best marathoners in the world aren't hammering it every day. 5 or 6 days a week are slow days for them, right? And so in the gym, and like, and we have to get kids across, like, when's the last time you took a day off, right? Because a day off is just as important as the day you're maxing out and trying to time your 40.
Yeah, yeah, we talk a lot about, and I talk about this in the new book, crafting your annual and seasonal game plan.
Mm,
Having an annual game plan, which is I'm going to take these 8 weeks off of sports completely,
mm,
which 2% of athletes ever do that, right? We talk about having a seasonal game plan, which is like throughout your season, are you going to take one day off each week, truly off, or are you going to go outside and play regardless, right? And
mhm,
it's fine to play because you love it, but if you're not taking any time off, then you're probably right. You're falling behind, ironically enough. And then I talk a lot about ultradian rhythms, something that not a lot of people discuss. They know what circadian rhythms are, right? Your sleep wake cycles, but ultradian rhythms is literally how we were created, how we were designed to sprint and to rest, to
mm,
sprint and to rest. And so it's been widely studied that, the best of the best can only focus and do something at a high level for 90 minutes at a time. And the longer that you work to high capacity, whether it's training in a gym or training at practice, the longer of a true rest you need in order to get yourself back to full, recovery so you can perform at a high level again. So 90 minutes on, 30 minutes off. So I work with coaches and some of them, the smart ones, take me up on it. If you're going to have a 3 hour practice, you need to throw a 30-minute rest in there.
mm.
And they're like, no way. Okay. Well, the last hour of your practice, you're getting nothing from your players.
Yeah.
Like it's as if it's if you only had a 2 hour practice. And so
And then
John
and then
Wooden was a master at that.
and then you get frustrated, and then you get angry at them, and then you say, "Why can't you focus?" And then the smart kid who's afraid to speak up would be like, "Because the game's only 60 minutes." So why are we playing 3 games here, coach? Like, and that's the issue, right? So like this idea that more is better it's often less is better.
Yeah. Yep. That's
Yeah, you
exactly right.
you have to let people recover. So talk about the Unstoppable Athlete, your new book, and sort of what prompted you to write this.
Yeah. Well, those three statements we just talked about, never be satisfied. If I rest, then they will leapfrog me. And then more is better. That literally makes up all of chapter 2, I think it is. And so
Yeah,
we're covering it already.
yeah, I
Uh,
figured.
but but I wrote this book because honestly, number one, I was working with so many athletes who just had this burning desire to be great, that wanted to reach their full potential, but I knew they had no clue what all it was going to take. And a
Hmm.
lot of it is what they need to stop doing, right? The
Hmm.
mindsets of work hard and all that. But then there was other things like their habits and how they develop their skills and having a game plan of their calendar and how to actually have some time management in their life. Like I realized that there were so many pieces that athletes weren't learning from their coaches. And you could argue that it's kind of out of a coach's scope, you know, to teach an athlete all the habits and the disciplines that they'll need to become unstoppable. But for most athletes, they wanted it, but they really just didn't know. And so I wanted to put all these keys, these key points that's going to help them become unstoppable into one book, because I think every kid deserves what it should feel like to reach their full potential. You know, like everybody deserves that, but not everyone knows what it takes. So that was for one population, and then the second population was the athlete who was already performing at a really high level.
Hmm.
And I've seen it time and time again. I knew they were going to be stopped by the external forces of anxiety or stress or pressure or burnout, right? Like unstoppable kind of has two meanings in the book.
Hmm.
One is literal, like become that athlete who hears over the loudspeaker, he just can't be stopped, or she just can't be stopped. She's unstoppable. Like get yourself to the point where you can hear those words. And on the flip side, set yourself up to not be stopped by your own things that are within your control.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And I interviewed a guy named Brad Stulberg a couple months back. He wrote a book called Master of Change, and he talked about, I think it's a Norwegian speed skater who was Olympic gold medalist, and I don't know his name, and I'm certainly not going to try to pronounce it if I did. But he talked about how he became unstoppable was he's, for years he just couldn't, he wouldn't get it done in the big competitions, right? Especially in like an Olympic sport where it's every 4 years or every 2 years for a world championship and then an Olympics, and and you put everything into that 1 minute, right? And he's like, my whole life was this. And then I made this change where I took a step back, and he used this great analogy. I thought he's like, you need a house with many rooms, right? And
Mm.
you can't spend all of your time in one room. You can spend a lot of time in that room, but you got to visit the others. Because if you spend all your time in one room, your whole identity is tied up in this reaching my potential, winning an
Yeah.
Olympic gold medal. Um, and that causes so much stress and anxiety in the moment where my whole life is defined by the next minute, right?
Mm.
Versus I have many rooms that I visit. So this speed skater said from Monday through Friday, I am the Olympic speed skater. I am training to win a gold medal. And Friday night to Sunday, I'm going out with my friends, right? And I'm not going to be stupid, but I'm also going to just listen to music, play music, whatever I'm going to do, and visit these other rooms. And then he turns around and wins the gold the next time because he just like, I didn't feel like it was going to define my career. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think this is really important message to get across to athletes as well, is like, if your whole identity is driven by performance, it's not a great path, and it often leads to burnout, dropout, and psychological issues. If your identity is a purpose-based identity, this is who I am as a human being, then you can also perform at a really high level.
Yeah. Yeah. In the book, I did something I never thought I would do. And I dedicated almost a whole chapter to talking about and studying LeBron James.
Yeah.
Now I'm an MJ fan, right? I'm like, if anyone
Okay.
says to me, like Andrew, who do you think's the GOAT, right? I say
Uh-huh.
MJ every time. But when I really think about who's the success in life, right? Who has the more successful life? I look at the health, the happiness, the what seems to be right from the outside looking in, the wholeness of family, the dynamics there, and LeBron has lasted for 21 now seasons, playing at the highest level. He's well, not the highest level, but he's playing at an extremely high level. And when you start to learn about how he prioritizes his time outside of basketball, you can tell he values balance in the other areas of his life. And if you want to become enduringly great as an athlete, right, record breaker, Hall of Famer, that's different than just being good for a few seasons and being at the top of the scoreboard or record books for a couple seasons.
Mhm.
And so there's so many great lessons that I learned when I really looked into LeBron that I put in that book. And some athletes might say, "Well, I'm not planning on playing 25 years pro, right? I just want to be good for my next 5 seasons." That's still endurance. That's a degree of endurance because within 1 year for a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old, 1 year represents a bigger chunk of their life, right? Percentage wise
Yeah.
than a 35, 40-year-old, right? 1 year is just 2.5% of our lives.
Yeah.
So that perspective is really important.
Yeah, man, 100%. So what is like what is a I mean maybe you kind of touched on it already, but like what's a big takeaway? What's someone gonna get if they get the unstoppable athlete? Like what's the toolkit? What are they gonna get out of that? Because, for everyone listening, I haven't seen the book yet either. So we just wanted to talk about and touch on it because it's coming out here soon.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, this book, like what I've actually started to gather from some parents who have read it, they're saying like, Andrew, these are all the things that I've been trying to tell my athlete, but they
Mhm.
don't hear it from me.
Yeah.
They need to hear it from somebody else and a coach. And the
Yeah.
fact that I put in like references of collegiate athletes or stories of professional athletes that these kids can relate to, that's really what they're going to get out of it is they're going to get relatable content that is all the things a parent really wants their kid to hear, right? Their
Mhm.
discipline and their motivation to do the things they don't feel like doing on off days, but at the same time prioritizing the rest and recovery that they need to, and also valuing the relationships in their life, like all these things that a parent wants for their kid, right? The ultimate kid, the ultimate athlete who is successful not just on the field but off the field in the classroom. It's like, what are the habits and the best practices of an athlete who actually achieves that seemingly impossible feat, which is to have balance and passion and performance. That's what's in this book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's such an important thing, and thank you for doing it. And I, as a parent myself of two, almost, one high school grad and one about two, and the most important thing in life is surrounding them with voices that instill good messages, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's books, but especially coaches, um, and teachers and mentors in their life who say the same exact thing that you do as mom and dad, but they're ready to listen because you're not mom and dad, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I love there's this great Mark Twain quote. He says, when I was 18, my dad was so ignorant I couldn't stand to be around the man, and by the time I turned 23, I couldn't believe how much he had learned in 5 years or something like that. Yeah. So get ready for that, by the way,
That's right.
young dad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, is there any final thoughts or any last things you want to leave our listeners with here today? I mean, you speak on such a great wide range of things from mindset to athlete development to the physical preparation to the mental preparation. Any final thoughts?
I would just say that as a parent, we've all heard the quote, or most of us have probably heard the quote that after the age of 11 or 12, the parent or the parent's no longer the biggest influence in the kid's life. The coach is, or the society is, and I would push back against that and not believe that 100%, because I know kids who they continue to be influenced by their parents into their 20s, their 30s. As long as the parent stays consistent and keeps believing that they have that influence in their athlete. So I think that most parents, they're doing a great job. Sports can be a great vehicle to teach your athletes life lessons, but they can also be a terrible vehicle if you don't use them the right way. And so
Mm,
I would say parents just keep learning and growing, just like you and I are, John, just figuring this out along the way. If we stay committed to the journey of learning and growing, then we're going to watch this next generation of world changers and future leaders erupt, and they're going to point back and say, hey, it was the Changing the Game podcast, or it was my parent, or it was somebody that really made that happen in my life.
mm, love it. How can people connect with you? Learn about your gyms if you're in the Maryland, DC area, and then also, how can they get your books?
Yeah, so my website is andrewjsimpson.com. The books are on Amazon, of course, but social media at Coach Andrew Simpson. That's where you can find me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as well. And then the gyms are PFP. You'll see PFP Frederick, PFP Eldersburg, PFP Columbia. We've got a few locations. And so if you're not in Maryland, then we'll try to get to you at some point. But be patient with us.
Mm, awesome. And that's great, man. Well, truly appreciate everything. This conversation flew by. I got a page of notes here, and I know that I'm going to be using your ideas, some of your ideas of, creating these magic moments and things like that. I'll add them to my flute, as I say. So,
I'm taking the flute idea, so I
yeah.
appreciate that one.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for being on the Way Champions.
Thanks, John.
Wow, thank you to Andrew Simpson, coach at Coach Andrew Simpson or andrewjsimpson.com, to connect with him, find his books, all that sort of stuff. Just a great conversation. I loved those sort of five, no's, right? No pregame reminders, no bribes, no motivational speeches, no yelling during the game, no post-game debrief on the ride home. And what can you do? Just show up, cheer, and ask lots of questions. I mean, that's some great stuff. And I also love this idea of the magic moments and um, all sorts of stuff. So, really great conversation. I hope you'll check out his new book, The Unstoppable Athlete, and the one we also talked about, The Youth Truth, as well. All right. Remember, we are open for registration for the Wade Champions Conference. We're starting to get the registrations, starting to get people in. We are super close here to announcing our featured speakers, two of whom are going to be in the room, which is super, super exciting for us this year. And the third, we're going to see whether they are in the room or virtually. But man, it was so fun last year with Steve Kerr and Phil Jackson and Cindy Timshel, and it's going to be even more fun this year as well. So super excited about that. As far as anything else we can do for you, right? If you are looking for speakers for your school or your sports club, training your coaches, parents, whatever, um, reach out. John at changingthegameproject.com. We can take care of you. We're booking for the fall of 24 at this point. But yeah, those things tend to fill up quick these next month or so. So reach out, connect with us. Help us support the podcast through Patreon or just sign up for our email list at changingthegameproject.com. Any of those things would be awesome. All right. So remember, your influence is never neutral. So go out there, change the world, make a difference. We'll see you again next week.